Hello everyone, and welcome to my Sister Wives For You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In a whirlwind of events that seemed to catch even the most devoted followers off guard, the news of Kody Brown, longtime reality television figure, famous patriarch, and endlessly analyzed personality, finding himself both separated and married again rippled through fan communities with the force of a sudden desert storm, blowing across forums, podcasts, and social feeds with a dizzying mixture of disbelief, fascination, speculation, and excitement, all culminating in a tidal wave of commentary that no one, perhaps not even Kody himself, could have anticipated. And as the story unfurled day by day, people were left scrambling to understand how a man whose family dynamics had already become a cultural touchstone of complexity and long-form conversation could possibly generate yet another twist dramatic enough to overshadow the years of emotional arcs, relationship transitions, and personal revelations that had already played out in front of millions. Yet somehow, the idea of Kody Brown's new wife, a woman whose arrival appeared to materialize like a rumor made flesh, brought with it not only shock value but an undeniable narrative energy that immediately prompted observers to revisit every past episode, interview, and public moment in search of clues, patterns, or the faintest signs that this development had been brewing beneath the surface all along. And as the story crystallized into something more substantial than hearsay, the fascination deepened, because this new chapter didn't resemble a tidy coda or even a familiar reboot, but rather a reinvention, a pivot, a seismic shift that pushed the ongoing saga of Kody's personal life into uncharted territory, beginning with the reports that after a prolonged period of strain, emotional distance, and reevaluation, some of which had already played out in heavily scrutinized ways, Kody had finally reached the point of parting ways with what had been left of his once expansive marital network, a process described not as abrupt but as the slow, complicated, sometimes painful unwinding of years of intertwined relationships, shared histories, and shifting personal needs, a process that, according to those following closely, reflected not only the dissolution of a marriage, but the recalibration of identity itself. Because Kody Brown was not merely a husband in the conventional sense, but the emblematic center of a plural household system that countless viewers had dissected for more than a decade, and thus the idea of him stepping into a new marriage, particularly so soon after definitive separations, was a narrative twist carrying the weight of symbolic reinvention. But if the separation itself was startling, the revelation of a new wife was what left audiences genuinely stunned, for not only did the relationship seem to emerge from outside the familiar orbit of the Sister Wives universe, but the woman at the center of the headlines, introduced to the public neither through the slow unveiling typical of reality television editing nor through years of cameo appearances and on-screen introductions, but instead through a sudden wave of coverage, appeared refreshingly unfamiliar, a presence unconnected to the established arcs and therefore a disruption, an anomaly, a catalyst for an entirely new phase in a long-running public story. And as people rushed to learn anything they could about her, initial descriptions painted a portrait of someone strikingly independent, with a professional background outside entertainment, reportedly grounded, articulate, private, and unaccustomed to the glare of reality TV speculation, which only intensified the fascination because this did not seem like a woman seeking celebrity adjacency, but rather someone who, despite knowing the attention such a marriage would ignite, had somehow chosen the relationship for reasons that insiders described as sincere, intentional, and mutually centered on shared vision rather than spectacle, creating a contrast to the public assumption that anyone entering Kody Brown's life would inevitably be stepping into a media narrative rather than a personal one. And while many wondered how the pair had even met, the circulating accounts, still hazy, still unconfirmed, still tinged with a storytelling aura, suggested a surprisingly ordinary intersection of paths, something tied to mutual acquaintances, overlapping social gatherings, and a series of conversations that reportedly began less as courtship and more as the kind of unexpectedly meaningful dialogue that grows from shared experiences of transition, reinvention, or personal struggle, because if the available story fragments could be believed, both Kody and his new partner had recently undergone periods of reflection, emotional upheaval and realignment, and the connection that blossomed between them, according to the people close enough to witness early moments, was grounded in a sense of clarity rather than whirlwind spontaneity. Though the speed with which the relationship evolved still shocked observers who had expected Kody to retreat from commitment after the significant dissolutions that preceded it. Yet even for those who followed every detail with almost academic dedication, the deeper surprise was not merely that Kody married again, but that his new wife, described as poised, thoughtful, and unexpectedly charismatic in a way that resonated even beyond the small glimpses initially available, seemed to bring out a version of Kody that fans claimed they had not seen in years, an energy shift marked by a calmer demeanor, a more grounded presence, and an openness that commentators interpreted as indicative of major internal change, leading to a new wave of speculation about whether this marriage represented not a continuation of old patterns, but the potential beginning of something more balanced, more modern, and more aligned with personal growth than the intricate, tension-laden dynamics that had dominated much of his earlier life on screen. And as all these interpretations multiplied across social platforms, the astonishment intensified, especially when early public sightings and unofficial reports suggested that the couple's dynamic was markedly different from anything audiences had come to expect, demonstrating a partnership that observers described as equal, deeply communicative, and notably private, with the new wife appearing neither intimidated by nor particularly invested in the fame attached to Kody's name, instead maintaining an air of self-possession that fans found refreshing, almost grounding, as if her presence signaled a distinct shift away from the emotionally charged group family atmosphere and towards something quieter, more focused, more aligned with mutual understanding than collective negotiation. In fact, as more anecdotes filtered through various channels, highlighting the new wife's career achievements, her thoughtful disposition, her ability to maintain personal boundaries even amid an influx of media attention, and her reportedly strong sense of personal identity, the public reaction evolved from initial shock into an almost collective intrigue, as fans remarked that she seemed to be bringing a sense of new balance into Kody's life, prompting many to wonder whether this relationship might actually represent a genuine turning point rather than a continuation of old cycles, though of course, not everyone was ready to embrace the narrative of reinvention, as some longtime viewers insisted on interrogating every detail for hints of future conflict or unresolved complexity, believing that Kody's relational story had never been straightforward and likely never would be. Yet, even among skeptics, there was broad acknowledgement that this new marriage felt substantively different, even if only because it appeared quieter, more intentional, and less entangled in the historical web that had for so long shaped public perception of his romantic life. And as the weeks unfolded, bringing with them new snippets of information, public appearances, glimpses of shared projects, comments from acquaintances noting the couple's emerging synergy, the cultural conversation began expanding beyond shock toward broader reflection, with many commentators noting that the spectacle of Kody Brown getting married again after such a dramatic series of separations served as a kind of cultural mirror, forcing audiences to confront their own expectations about growth, reinvention, and the ability of public figures to reshape their personal narratives after years of scrutiny, because whether one embraced the possibility of change or remained skeptical, the underlying reality was that people were undeniably drawn to the story, compelled not simply by the headline but by what it represented, a reminder that the arcs of familiar public figures can still surprise, still evolve, still venture into territory that challenges old assumptions. And so the saga of Kody Brown's new wife, her unexpected arrival, her grounded presence, her effect on the man long embedded in one of reality television's most complicated family narratives, became more than a story about marriage after separation and instead transformed into a cultural moment, one that invited curiosity, debate, and contemplation, leaving people stunned not only by the rapidity of the developments but by what they suggested, that even in the most familiar long-running narratives, even in stories told and retold through countless episodes and recaps, there is always room for a new chapter to begin, reshaping the arc, defying assumptions, and reminding audiences that the lives of those in the spotlight can change as unpredictably and profoundly as anyone else's, often in ways that no one, not even the fans who think they've seen everything, expects. And yet the most astonishing aspect of the entire development was how swiftly the public conversation around Kody Brown transformed once people began speculating about the deeper emotional undercurrents that might have driven him toward such a dramatic new beginning, because for years, viewers had watched him navigate an ever-shifting landscape of connection, conflict, intimacy, and emotional fatigue, all heightened by the relentless visibility that accompanies life on a reality television stage. And many now argued that the very act of entering a new marriage so soon after the dissolution of his previous relationships might reflect a determination to redefine himself rather than an impulsive leap into familiar patterns, a theory that gained traction as small, indirect glimpses of his new wife suggested she was not merely another participant in an existing storyline, but someone who seemed to have prompted a kind of introspective reckoning in him, encouraging a quieter, more mindful approach to partnership, one rooted less in the logistical complexity of a plural household and more in the clarity of one-on-one connection, something that struck fans as both surprising and strangely overdue. And this interpretation only deepened when people who claimed to be close to the couple began sharing subtle hints that Kody had been undergoing a period of emotional reset long before the public realized it, engaging in conversations about identity, legacy, and personal values, examining what had gone wrong in past relationships, and confronting aspects of himself that had fueled tensions over the years, a process that reportedly left him more open than ever to building something fundamentally different, something simpler, healthier, and more aligned with his present-day priorities rather than the framework he had lived within for so long, a framework that, while once central to his sense of purpose, had over time become strained under the weight of divergent needs, mismatched expectations, and the kind of long-term stress that inevitably shapes the trajectory of any family system, plural or otherwise. And as this narrative gained traction, people began reevaluating the new wife not as an unexpected addition but as a symbol of this next phase, someone who, through her presence and personality, might be offering a new kind of stability, not because she arrived with the intention of transforming him, but because their connection reportedly grew from a place that was unburdened by old tensions, unshaped by public pressure, and grounded in a mutual understanding that both had lived enough life, experienced enough change, and weathered enough emotional storms to know that any new beginning must be forged with care rather than haste, a notion that cast their marriage in a different light, less sensational, more grounded, and unexpectedly tender, even if the timing still struck many as shocking. And this evolving interpretation of events pushed fans and commentators into particularly animated discussions about how public figures navigate reinvention after long, highly visible personal histories, with some insisting that the speed of Kody's remarriage reflected denial or avoidance, while others argued passionately that the move demonstrated courage, a willingness to step forward rather than remain mired in the emotional complexities of a past that had long been stretched to breaking. And what made the conversation even more fascinating was the way it exposed deeper cultural debates about what constitutes appropriate healing time, how people rebuild after relational collapse, and whether an individual who has spent so many years balancing multiple emotional bonds might pursue something radically different as an act of personal liberation rather than continuation. And it was precisely this collision of perspectives that kept audiences tuned into the continuing developments, eager to dissect every emerging detail, every public interaction, and every whispered anecdote for clues about what this new chapter meant, not only for Kody, but for the larger narrative ecosystem that had surrounded him for over a decade. And as the story continued to expand, the focus gradually widened beyond the immediate shock and toward the broader horizon of what this new marriage might signify for the future, with commentators speculating about whether the couple might eventually appear publicly together in a more structured capacity, whether the new wife would remain entirely behind the scenes, or whether she might become, intentionally or not, the catalyst for a reimagined public image. though early impressions suggested she had little interest in the performative aspects of fame and instead valued depth, privacy, and authenticity. Qualities that intrigued fans who wondered how such traits would interact with the lingering expectations tied to Kody's decades-long presence in the spotlight, and ultimately, as conversations continued to swirl and theories multiplied, what remained undeniable was the profound sense of collective astonishment that accompanied the revelation, not just because Kody Brown was separated and married again, not just because his new wife had captivated public imagination with her sudden emergence and enigmatic presence, but because the entire development served as a reminder that even the most familiar public figures can still disrupt expectations, still surprise, still pivot into new stories that make audiences reassess everything they thought they understood, leaving them stunned, fascinated, and eager to see where the narrative might lead next, as if the unfolding of real life could, at times, rival even the most dramatic arcs scripted for television.